Today's webinar is actually about a really important topic, and I renamed this webinar right before it because there's a lot of things covered here today that a lot of attorneys and even law students don't know about when they're running their careers. And I've seen people at all levels of their careers, whether or not they're first-year attorneys or experienced attorneys or partners and even large law firms, and people from the largest law firms and smaller law firms make just a massive number of mistakes in terms of things that they do with their career and how that affects their long-term career. And why I say that, and I think that why this is such an important topic, is because what happens is a lot of attorneys will make decisions at different stages of their career to do certain things, and they'll actually it'll lock them out of future opportunity. And I would say that what I'm going to cover today is very important for you because probably like over 80% of attorneys make these mistakes, and it ends up limiting their upper potential, it ends up limiting the things that happen to them, and makes them unhappy practicing law. And it creates all sorts of issues that wouldn't happen if you didn't make these mistakes. And I actually think this is like such an important topic. It's almost like it should be required viewing for anybody in the legal profession because what you'll learn today will give you tools to avoid the mistakes that literally over 80% of people make, that often makes them unemployed, that makes them never advance, that actually makes them unhappy practicing law, and all sorts of other things. Today's webinar is for you if you are really dedicated to having a good legal career, if you want the tools that'll show you how to have a good legal career, and if you want to avoid the serious mistakes that most people are making that truly limit them. And when I look at resumes, and I look at them all day, probably at least 80% of attorneys are making these mistakes. And because they're making these mistakes, they're not really marketable. They may get a job at a firm that pays less money than they have the potential to make and still keep practicing, or they may be able to move between different jobs, almost like a journeyman, but they're never really going to. Avoiding these mistakes and things that other people are doing is going to put you literally ahead of 80% of all attorneys. At the end of this webinar, I would just say if all it does is get you more interviews, then it'll have been worth it. If all it does is get you into a better job, it'll be worth it. If all it does is help you make more money, it'll be worth it. I think this is an extremely good use of your time watching this today, and I commend you for showing up and being willing to learn. And we'll get started. At the end of the webinar, I'll answer questions and take questions that people might have. And then any questions you have, I will answer. And this is a live webinar, so we'll be able to go through that all. One of the main things that law firms are concerned about when they're interviewing you is, are you going to enjoy working there? Does it seem like you're enthusiastic about working at the firm and the job? And this is what happens anytime you get into an interview. The law firm is measuring that, because if you don't have enthusiasm for the work, then and working there, then they're going to find someone who can. And good law firms, like the ones that have been around for a good length of time, all know that if they're able to hire people that have a real interest and really want to work there and seem like they'll enjoy working there, those are the people that they're going to choose to work there, not people that go in and look at it like a job. And you can never go into any law firm and act like it's just a job. You have to go into interviews and you have to convince people that you're going to be happy working there. And I just want to make a couple points just to get started. A lot of times when people are going into law firms and seeing if they're going to enjoy working there or whatever, they may go into smaller law firms that they think are beneath them. They may go into law firms that they may have read bad things about online. And they may come in with these preconceived notions about what it's going to be like to work there and not really have a lot of enthusiasm. And your job when you get any interview is just to take the screening interview and act enthusiastic and get to the next stage, and then do the same thing with your follow-up interviews. And with your follow-up interviews, you have to do the same thing of convincing the firm that you're going to enjoy working there. And I'll show you today how law firms evaluate that, and all the things and all the mistakes that you may have made that need to be fixed, or all the mistakes you can avoid making. And I would encourage you also today to take notes, because this stuff is just extremely important. And if you do understand it, you're going to have a much better career. You're going to convert far more applications into interviews and offers, and you're going to convert far more interviews into offers. And there are attorneys out there that just because of their nature will likely be happy wherever they go, provided that it's a decent job. And there are also attorneys that are likely to be unhappy whatever firm they go to, regardless if they're like an attorney moving between Am Law 100 law firms, or they're an attorney that's just starting out their career, someone that's at a smaller firm. So you need to decide and think about the jobs you went into in the past. Have you gone into them and been unhappy, or have you gone into them and been happy and communicated that to the people that you're speaking with? And because I'm in the law firm recruiting business, my objective is to find people that are not making these mistakes with their career, that look like they're going to be happy wherever they go. Because if a law firm hires somebody for me that's not happy, then it has all these negative consequences on my brand, as well as the ability of me to make placements at firms like that in the future. So this is one of the main things that I'm looking for in resumes. And you can very easily spot an attorney that's unlikely to be happy, as well as an attorney that's likely to be happy. And I've also noticed, because I hire people, that the people that were at their last jobs that I hired maybe were there like 10 years or longer. In almost all cases, those people stay the same number of years with me. If they were at their last job for 10 years, they stay for 10 years. If they were at their last job for 1 or 2 years, they tend to stay the exact same length of time. And it's very common. It's almost like predictable based on looking at a resume. And what happens with people that last a long time at a job is they're able to manage the ups and downs. They're able to commit and give as much as they can when they get into a job. They're honest, and they tend not to gossip in firms and take the side of people that are against the firm. And so instead of finding reasons that things aren't necessarily working out, they find ways to make things work. And they continually advance to better and better positions because they are committed, they look happy, and law firms want to keep around people that are like this. And there's a whole other group of people, and it's always been this way, by the way. It doesn't have anything to do with like generations or whatever. It's been this way for as long as I've been in this business. But there's people that will often go into a firm. They will convince the firm that they're going to commit and be happy there. But then once they get there, they always find reasons to be unhappy. A lot of the time, it's because their work is criticized, or they don't feel valued based on things that the firm does, or they don't feel like they're getting enough responsibility. I mean, it could be a variety of things. But what happens when people get into firms and they're not necessarily happy, or they're just this type of personality type, they start doing things like being critical of their supervisors, critical of management, finding other things to be critical of the firm, and just all sorts of things that end up making them unenthusiastic and happy in their jobs. And it can be just a variety of reasons. There's all sorts of reasons you can find when you go to work any place of not to be enthusiastic and happy about the job. And this is what a lot of people do. And then once they get unhappy, then they start looking for another job. And the same process continues to repeat itself over and over again. And how serious is this? I've seen people that, for example, went to Yale Law School and were at their first job in a law firm for a year, then their next job in a law firm for a year. And then even though they have these incredible qualifications and were coming from really big firms, smart firms will always reject them because they know that this process is just going to repeat itself over, and they don't want to hire someone that's going to be cancerous and not happy there. And because when people are like that, it drags down other people around them, and then the person leaves, and it's just not worth it, even though they have really good qualifications. So if you're happy if you're happy and you commit wherever you go, this is just a certain personality type. And law firms want to hire these kind of attorneys because they know that the attorney is going to be predictable. They're not going to rock the boat. They're going to be there and raising and lowering the morale of people, and law firms like that. And when someone is happy and not against the firm or just unhappy in general, the law firm feels like it's in control. It feels the assignments it's giving and the work it's doing is appreciated. It feels it has control over the person. If it's not going to, they don't have to walk on pins and needles and different things. And so even with an attorney without business that is able to do this for a long period of time, they are invited to stay around. The law firms will make them counsel if it's a huge law firm without a lot of partnership opportunities, or they'll even make them partners, in most cases, not equity partners first, but if they continue with that sort of attitude and enthusiasm is infectious, and they'll often bring in clients. And I just see this over and over again. Law firms really respect people who don't gossip and put their head down, are pleasant to be around, and work hard. These are exactly what law firms need. Imagine one example I like to give is the difference between soldiers and generals. So if someone is a soldier, that means that they'll just carry out and do whatever they're asked. It means like running into enemy fire. This is what law firms want. They want people that are soldiers and aren't questioning leadership and are just doing the best job they can, because if someone is a bad employee there and they're unhappy, they're going to be dragging down other people around them, and then they're going to leave, and it's going to create problems with clients. It's going to create problems with people there. It's going to create problems with the morale of the attorneys there. They'll also think, hey, maybe there's something wrong and I should leave too. So those sorts of people law firms avoid. And when someone is elevated to be a partner in any firm, other people are happy for them and will say good things about them. And people want to do nice things. They want to reward people that are working hard and committed to making it a good place to work. They want to keep those people around. And those are the kind of people that are kept around when there's work slowdowns, recessions in your practice area. The law firm just loses clients and things. They try to keep those people around. And the people that are negative are just cancerous and are always the first to go, even if they have really good qualifications, even if the quality of the work may be better. They want to keep around people that are enthusiastic. And this is how law firms are able to survive. They can only survive over the long term if they're able to have people that are happy as opposed to unhappy. And this happens at all levels of the legal profession. Like I was talking to a partner last week that just took the side of some people that were very negative at a firm, and he had been there for over 20 years, and it just backfired on him. And they just didn't like that someone that had a lot of power in that firm and had a lot of business. I think he had $3 or $4 million worth of business at a mid-sized firm, which is very good. They actually ended up asking him to leave and gave him till, I don't know, I think December 31st to find a new job. Being in that situation obviously isn't ideal, and it can affect you at all levels of your career. So if you're a partner that's unhappy, the law firms don't like it. If you're an associate that's unhappy, they don't like it either, and they will often force you out just based on that. And you may not even know what's happening. You don't know why. And I will say that you have to also remember that people that are good employees at a firm that are positive and things do lose their jobs, but more often it's the people that are very positive and end up doing well. And law firms will hire and keep these people around because they're good for the organization. The law firm can recognize these sorts of people, often on paper, which I'll show you how they do. And they keep them around and they advance them. Just think about your situation. Imagine you were very wealthy and you had all this staff at your house, and there was a couple, maybe you had 5 maids or something. Imagine a couple of them were just very negative and unhappy, always complaining, and you could tell they were unhappy. You would not want them around because it just wouldn't feel good. It wouldn't feel good having them in your house. You wouldn't look forward to seeing them. They were always creating problems, and you just wouldn't like it, and you wouldn't want them around. And you have to always put yourself in the shoes of people that are hiring you and you're working for, because they don't like that either. And one reason they want you to be happy is because their clients, they want that for their clients as well. Because if the people working for the clients don't seem happy, the clients aren't going to the firm. And if the person's unhappy, it's just not something that's bringing other people up. It's bringing people down, and it's making the law firm more and more toxic. And when law firms become like toxic places to work, it's often because there's so many of these people there that it just is not a pleasant place. One of the most common ways this often happens is when 2 law firms will merge, and they'll often merge for different reasons. They want a larger national footprint, or they want more attorneys in different practice areas and things like that. But what often happens is these groups come together, they're unhappy. The group from each firm just never really merges with the group from the other firm, and it just becomes this toxic place. And everyone that works there can pick up on it. It's always a problem for law firms and for them continuing to operate good businesses. And if a law firm hires too many unhappy attorneys, it will actually create all sorts of issues in its profitability and hurt the law firm a great deal. One thing to understand also is the better and better firm you're trying to go to, like older firms, say you're trying to work like in like an am law firm that's 75 years old or something, they instinctively know how to hire people and avoid hiring people that they don't think are going to be unhappy. They have very developed, they've over all this time, the kind of the DNA of the firm has learned that they need to keep those kind of people out. So if you ever appear like that on paper and you're trying to advance, it's going to hurt you. And people are unhappy for different reasons. Sometimes they may not just like practicing law, or just defaulting to being unhappy, maybe something that they just do automatically because of the way they were brought up. I don't know. And maybe that's the kind of person that you are. But if you are, you really need to think about, like, how is this helping me? Is this helping me make more money? Is this helping me advance in my career? Is this helping me being happy and enjoying what I'm doing? So here are some of the ways and things that you can avoid and also do on your resume, and then also in your interviews and where you go to show law firms that if they do hire you, you're likely to be a very good risk. One of the biggest things that I told you earlier on is that having long periods of stability in your past employers or your last employer is something that law firms value a lot, because there's just all sorts of reasons for that. But one of the main ones is that they know that if you were able to stay around for a long period of time, you're probably someone that wasn't negative, and you're probably someone that's able to ignore all the things that are negative in every law firm. And it shows a lot. And it's very important for many attorneys, not all, because you may have reasons for moving that are improving your income or your access to work, but it shows a lot. And attorneys that have, the more stability you have and the fewer moves you have on your resume, the more likely you're to get hired. So just think about it from a law firm's point of view. If they were hiring someone as a fifth-year attorney, and they had one person that had been at their last firm for 5 years, and then they had another person that had been at 3 firms over 5 years, which is very common for attorneys, even at the largest law firms, they're going to hire the person that's been at a law firm for 5 years as opposed to those other people most of the time. And so when you make all these moves because you're unhappy, you're actually limiting your future opportunities, because you look like someone that's going to be unhappy and move wherever you go. And why would they take that risk? If you were an employer, why would you take that risk? You would much more prefer to hire someone that wasn't doing all these moves and seemed committed wherever they go. What does it show when you've been at a law firm for an extended period of time and haven't moved a lot? It shows that you were able to get along with people in the firm, would be well liked enough that the law firm kept you around and didn't stop giving you work or give you bad performance reviews or ask you to leave, or you just had problems there. It also shows that if the person is able to stick around that long, that they were probably liked and they had people that were giving them work and liked them. If you manage to stay at any job for a decent length of time, it's going to communicate that you probably have a good office, good social skills, and are really someone that is likely to be a good hire. And one other point I would make to you, if you're a young attorney, you certainly can switch jobs to drastically increase your practice area or to work on better matters and things. But there's always a couple things that happen when you move. One of them is, if you're doing a really good job at a place, you start, and you've been there for a while, you start developing like all this political capital. Like, people trust you, people like you, you're more valuable than people that may lateral in later on that don't have all the political capital. And there's a lot of studies, it's crazy, but there's studies even that show people that once you move to a new firm, if you've been at your existing previous firm like 3 years and you're doing well there, it takes you about a year or two for the new firm to trust you. And so you have all that time where so the law firm's much more likely, you're much better off in the long run if you're able to stay employed with one law firm often for as long as you can. In the first 5 years of practice, you should always not look at it necessarily as an opportunity to make as much money as possible, but an opportunity to get trained in a practice area, because those first 5 years of people are giving you a lot of work and so forth, and you're doing well, you're going to have skills that will last you for decades. Attorneys start practicing at the age of 25, and then they end up practicing for often decades. You can start at 25 and practice for 65 years. Look at people that are have run for president in their 80s or been president in their 80s. It's just, you can keep working in this profession, especially if you're in a law firm for a long period of time. And law firms also know that if you're moving between firms, a lot of times it may be because you weren't doing good work. There's all sorts of reasons the law firms ask you to leave. And law firms will only keep people around to the extent that they're doing good work. And the other thing is, like, when you're working for a firm and you've been able to stay there a long time, it shows that you're loyal, that you're unlikely to be taken away like by another firm or someone else. And that also shows a lot of value. There is one reason that when law firms actually look at it in a very positive way when you're switching firms, and this is something I recommend to all attorneys that they try to do. If you're in a situation where you feel like you're ready to settle down someplace, when people apply to, if you're from a certain market, like you're from Minnesota and working in Chicago, or you're in New York and you're from Detroit, people are always very receptive if people are relocating back to your home market after some time working in another market. And the reason is that law firms don't have to be like cautious, like they're not as worried that there might be problems with you. It often actually conveys stability. You're more likely to stay at your next employer as opposed to you're moving because there's problems with your work. So an attorney that's moving like within their existing market, law firms are always very hesitant because they think that something may be wrong. But if you're moving home, there's a lot of things that suggest there's going to be stability. And that means that the stability would be that you're trying to go home and settle down, and they don't necessarily question your work as much. So anything on your resume and in your job search that suggests any form of stability or staying power and commitment is always extremely attractive to law firms. And the candidate that's moving home, when I work with them, you can actually apply to almost every law firm that matches what you want to do in the market. And most of the time, like 95% of the time, the law firm hire you won't even have an opening, but they will bring you in because they believe that you're likely to be very stable, and often that it's their only chance of hiring you until you find a place to work. So they will often move very quickly. And again, those moves are most often going to be unrelated to performance. And when you're moving in an existing market, there's always a suspicion of performance. So this just shows you, like, anytime I'm working with an attorney from a large market that wants to move to a new market, to a market where they're from, or even a mid-sized market that wants to move to a market where they're from, their odds of getting a position are just very high. And as opposed to someone that's moving within a market where their odds are much lower. It's also acceptable if you're moving firms for reasons beyond your control. So this doesn't necessarily suggest that there's anything wrong with you. Sometimes your practice area could be eliminated. Partners that you did work for leave to go to another firm. There's no work going on. Sometimes firms will lose a major client, and that's beyond your control. So if a law firm is looking at your reasons for moving, and those reasons seem like sufficiently dire and not something beyond your control, then a law firm isn't going to necessarily think you're a risk. But a lot of times people will move for reasons like the workload, like they'll want to go to a place where there's less work. They'll move because the firm they're at isn't paying high market salaries, which honestly is a good reason to move, but you need to be very careful. They'll often move because of poor morale at the firm that they're at. And when they interview, they will convey those reasons, and law firms will be often a little nervous. And the thing to remember is no matter where you are, no matter what firm you're at, there's going to be issues with the firm. So every firm has things wrong with it. It's just how firms work. And if you're the kind of person that's going to find a lot of things wrong with wherever you go, then that's going to make law firms a little bit nervous because if they can pick up on that because they know you do the same thing with them. So this is one of the most important things. And if you learn this, I think you really need to write this down and make this kind of a priority of the way you think about your job search, because this is very important. So when law firms are interviewing people, like people come in and they do sort of two different things. Like sometimes people will come in and the people that tend to convert the most interviews into offers will do one thing. And I'm going to tell you what that thing is right now. And it's actually very simple. What happens is the average of an attorney converting a screening interview into an offer without this tool is about 1 in 8. The average of people converting interviews into offers using this tool is usually about 6 to 8. So you can improve your odds of getting a job by almost 5 times in interviews if you come across as someone who's looking to add value. Meaning you ask questions about what would it look like if 30 days or 60 days into this job for me to be the best associate working for you? What have people done right here when they've come to work here that's made them advance? You ask questions like that. What type of work would I be able to do for you? And questions along those lines, like showing that you're serving people and you have an interest in doing a really good job. Like those sorts of questions are the kind of people, if you ask those sorts of questions, you're going to get jobs. And just think about it from the perspective, again, if you were interviewing someone and you were a law firm, or if you were interviewing someone to work for you in your house, people that were asking you questions about how they could do a good job and how they can make you happy would really stick out, because you would think this person really wants to do a good job, as opposed to someone that comes in and seems focused on salary, benefits, remote work, vacation, other things that indicate that their interests really are not in terms of contributing, but their interests are more in terms of what they can get and not necessarily contributing to the group, making the people that they want happy. And this point that I just brought up is really the difference between people that do a very good job and get interviews into offers, and very few people do this. This question applies in every business. It applies to any type of service business where you're working for people. You have to figure out like what they need in order for you to do a good job. And if you don't do that, you're just going to give people what you want, necessarily what they want. And law firms, you have to look at any law firm you work at. There's a difference between a client and a customer. And a customer is just someone that shows up and is transactional and they leave and that's it. And then there's clients that are under the care and protection of another. So that's the definition of a client. So anytime you're working for anybody, you need to treat them as a client. So if you're an associate, like partners are your clients, and you need to treat them like that, and you need to give them the same service you would want if someone was your client, or vice versa. You need to make sure that you emphasize that in terms of being a client of the person, as opposed to just like being there to do work and make money. So that piece of advice, I think, is something that can drastically help you in terms of your search, because once you start doing that, everything really changes, and people hire people that do that. And I don't know why more people don't do that, but you need to do that wherever you go. And when I see partners that are very good interviewers, like that have been doing this for 30 plus years, that's one of the things that they do very well, is they're always able to do that. And having that mentality really makes them be successful. And no one teaches you this in law school. Most career people don't teach you this, but learning how to do that and doing that, asking what you can do to add value, not pretending, but acting like that's your number one concern, then that's very important. And law firms are groups of people, and anytime people come together in groups, they need to be seen as all supporting one another and in a positive way. And if you're not doing that, then law firms don't want that. And they don't want people that seem excessively out for their own self-interest. Because if you're doing that, then you're acting like a customer looking for the best price and deal, and not someone that is
sure how to help you.
trying to help someone in a different way. So if you come across as more interested in the group that you're going to be working with. You don't ask self-serving questions. You're asking about the work, you're expressing enthusiasm, then you're going to get profoundly more jobs when you interview. And this is really the biggest difference between people that do really well and those that don't. I always am reminded, I had this woman that was from Skadden Arps in New York, and she was interviewing with these firms in West Virginia where her husband was moving. I don't remember what he was doing, but he had some important job there. And she was interviewing with these firms. They weren't very sophisticated, most of them very sophisticated law firms. The people there weren't that sophisticated in terms of the way they portrayed themselves. The work wasn't very sophisticated, but she went into all these interviews and she just asked all these questions about what she could do for them and how she would be really effective. And she knew that they did these jobs and she wanted to get a job and she wanted to negotiate her salary when she got it. But she went in like that and just blew these people away. I mean, they were like, this is the best interview I've ever seen. And she just did that instinctively. It's probably why she got a job at Skadden originally, but that sort of mindset can take you very far. And the more you come across as interested in yourself, as opposed to who you're working for and what they can do for you, especially at the interview stage, the more problems you're going to have. And it's the same thing when you get into firms. If you are more concerned about your self-interest, that will come through. If people feel like they can't meet those needs, then they're not going to view you as someone that's going to be there the long term. And that's going to create problems as well. One of the other big things that people do in resumes, and I see this again, probably at least 70% of resumes, is sometimes people will just go over the top on their resume. They'll talk about all these different achievements and things that they've done in the past that they believe are important. And there's certainly nothing wrong about that. But sometimes people that do that don't end up doing as well as they would like, because they're just emphasizing all these things that have very little to do with being successful. Now, this piece of advice I'm giving right now is something I think everybody knows, but you should never say anything negative about an employer. And I'm just saying this because I think everyone already knows this, but if you go into interviews and you have any criticisms about your former employer, then all the law firm's going to think is they're going to believe that you'll do the same thing when you get into them. And one thing that I think is very interesting, I was working with this partner in Phoenix recently, and I showed him a list of 200 law firms in Phoenix, and we just did like a screen share to go over them. And he knew literally out of those 200 law firms, he knew pretty much about each of them. Like he knew something about each of them and had his opinions about each of them. It's the same thing when you're interviewing in a lot of markets. If a partner's been around long enough, and these are usually the people that are going to interview you, they will already know the things that are likely to be wrong with your current employer, because if they're litigators, they've gone up against those firms or at some point in their careers, or they know something about them. Same thing with corporate attorneys and people in different practice areas. So you don't really need to criticize your employer, because most of the time, the people that are interviewing you are already going to know those criticisms. And you just have to be very careful about the sort of criticisms you level. People will go into interviews and will say, the morale's low. They'll go into interviews and they'll say all these things, even they'll say they don't have enough work on my practice area. And then that shows that maybe you're not willing to pitch in other practice areas when there's a slowdown in work. So you have to be just very careful about any type of criticism at all. And the other thing is being like group oriented. So there are people that are like entrepreneurial and are out for themselves, but there's other people that get their identity from belonging to and contributing to a group. And as I'm sure you can figure out, like those are the people that tend to do very well in law firms. If you're more of a group-centered person and you feel like you want to be part of a group, like you need a group to feel fulfilled, and you're likely to do well when you move there as well. Now, when you do move law firms want people that have strong reasons for wanting to work in law firms. And there could be things like they always wanted to be an attorney since they were young. They have some events that have solidified their desire to be a law firm attorney. So many like talented attorneys that I know that became very successful attorneys have had these life events that have made them want to be an attorney. I know one woman who became a trademark attorney because her father lost all his money and had all these issues due to being losing this trademark case and losing his business because now she wanted to be a trademark attorney because of that. Other people will have something to prove to their families for other reasons, or but very powerful reasons for wanting to be attorneys. And law firms like that. If you have a very powerful reason of wanting to work in a law firm and being in a law firm and you're able to communicate that, then that will set you apart. And you should have very strong reasons for wanting to work in a law firm. I mean, you should have reasons that are personal to you. And the reasons are there's all sorts of reasons to want to work in a law firm as opposed to another practice setting. There's the ability to work for paying clients that demand a certain level of work. There's the ability to become an expert in a practice area that is marketable throughout the rest of your career. There's the ability to develop a book of business that once you get that book of business will be something that will support you and grow for the rest of your career. There's just all sorts of reasons to, and also the longevity of law firm attorneys where you can practice into your 80s. So there's all sorts of reasons that you can have for wanting to work in a law firm. It could be like a love, you love a practice area, like you love corporate because you like helping companies do deals and helping them, and that gets you excited. But whatever the reasons that you have, you should have very solid reasons for wanting to work in a law firm. And that will come across in your interviews because you will have a sense of enthusiasm as opposed to maybe your mind's in another place. Like you want to work there for a few years and then work in house, or maybe you want to do something else. And if you don't have that as a goal, then you're going to be in trouble. All attorneys that succeed at a very high level in the profession all have goals. Like their goal is to be something. It's to be like the best attorney in their practice area. It's to eventually develop a book of business. Often it's to start out at a smaller firm and get into a much larger firm. And it could be related to money in the long term, all sorts of things. But you need to have a goal when you go in. And if you have a goal, that's going to make you far more persuasive and a law firm more likely to hire you. Even if you don't talk about that goal, it'll still come through because you'll be motivated and you'll be seeing each interview as a way to fulfill that goal. And then one of the biggest mistakes that resumes make, and this mistake, by the way, is something that's on probably, again, like 80% of resumes. Resumes may look like the person's overly entrepreneurial. Law firms do not necessarily want entrepreneurs because entrepreneurs are likely to leave and start their own business or compete with a law firm and start their own business. It's just not what lawyers are. Lawyers are expected to basically work on behalf of clients and put their head down, or work on behalf of the people they're working for and just do good work and not to be constantly interested in doing other things. And so that's what entrepreneurs are. Entrepreneurs rarely stay. You can certainly be an entrepreneur in the legal profession, start your own firm and do all these sorts of things. But while you're working for a law firm, you don't want to come across that way because law firms will avoid you. If they take one resume that's got all this entrepreneurial stuff on it and one without it, they're likely to hire a person that doesn't have that. Law firms, if you've had a lot of previous jobs with the government, it makes it look like you want to work for the government. Or if you've done all these jobs after law school that don't have a lot to do with practicing law, they're not going to like you. Once you go in-house, for example, it's not impossible, but it's very rare that a law firm's ever going to want you back because they're going to know that you have other interests. So your resume as an attorney from early on, or if it doesn't do it and hasn't done it for a while, it needs to look like you're law firm centric. That's what you want to do because you would want to do the same thing if you were hiring someone in a law firm. And then law firms will often, or people will, when they move, whatever law firm you're trying to work in, if you can convince them that you are really have wanted to work in this law firm for a long time, that you're extremely impressed with them, that you have reasons for wanting to work there. Most attorneys don't have these reasons, but often they may be in a market without a lot of really good firms, and there's one firm that's really good that they've always dreamed of working in, or there's a law firm that's an expert in their practice area. Like I was working with a woman in Chicago just this week that there was a very good like environmental boutique there, and she was doing environmental work for the government. She'd always wanted to work for this firm. So she went into these interviews and it was a small firm and they just went out of their way to hire her because she'd always wanted to work there. They did the kind of work and typically it's very difficult to transition from the government to a law firm. And she'd been out of law school by over like 15 years. But because she'd always had this goal to work there, they heard that and they just made all these exceptions. It represented something significant to her. And if you have firms in your market that you really want to work in, then if you have that desire when you go into interviews, it's going to make a real difference. Now, here are some clues that law firms can pick up that are going to show you're unlikely to be happy wherever you go. One of the things are people that have gaps of unemployment on their resume. Those sorts of people are most likely to be unhappy wherever they go, because if you have unemployment gaps on your resume, it's going to show that you either believe you don't need to work, you do not want to work, or you've been let go by a firm, not given work, or even that you're not enthusiastic enough about getting another job, that you don't have a real desire to find a job. One thing that I teach a lot and I think is very important is you can, regardless of the city you're in, you can always find someone that will hire you. You don't just apply to jobs. You apply to firms that do your practice here, and you represent yourself like you would represent a client trying to find the answer to some sort of question. And if you're not doing that and you're just sitting on the sidelines, then it probably shows that you're not that enthusiastic about working. And if you aren't getting a job when you're unemployed, it shows that you're probably not doing a lot of the things that I talked about earlier in interviews. So the longer time that goes by, the more future firms are going to think that there's something wrong with you. And I don't like saying this because I know that a lot of people, I'm sure, watching this are unemployed or may have lost their job and are unemployed. But you really need to be very aggressive about trying to get a job, and learning what I've talked about so far today is a huge step. But there are attorneys that will decide that they're no longer interested in working, will take several months off and decide they want to go back. And in almost all cases, that these attorneys do not get a good reception in the law firm. And the reason why, from law firms, and the reason why is you just have to put yourself in the shoes of a law firm. Like, they have the choice of hiring someone that's unemployed, meaning they're not going to have as many questions about them, or someone that's unemployed. And if you're unemployed, that raises a lot more questions. So it's much more difficult for you to get a job when you're unemployed, especially for a long period of time when they can hire someone that's employed. The rule is that for all attorneys, and this is something that they don't really teach you in law school, and that other career people may not teach. Maybe it's in other industries, I don't know, but I certainly haven't heard this taught very much, is that once you start working as an attorney, regardless of your situation, unless you got very ill or had some like traumatic life event, you're really expected to stay employed without any employment gaps, because the moment you get employment gaps, it shows either a lack of commitment or that you lost your job or other things like that. So if you're in a firm where you think you might lose your job, you should start looking. You should always be looking at the market and things that are going on. You should never not stop looking at different places you could work and networking, looking at job listings, whether it's on Indeed or Law Crossing, which is a good source of jobs because they're jobs that aren't advertised. They come off of firm websites and so forth. But you should always be looking at potential opportunities and knowing what your marketability is, especially if you're at a firm where you're not necessarily, you're not secure, because once you have this gap on your resume, there's just so many questions that people will have. And you really need to avoid gaps on your resume. And if you have gaps on your resume, there certainly can be overcome. But the next job you do get, you need to show some stability and stay there as long as you can. And attorneys that kind of leave the practice of law, they'll often do so because they don't like the hours, the stress, they may not get along with people. And if they're not working and then they go back to a new firm, they rarely stay very long. And they haven't wanted to work for an extended period of time or haven't been able to get a job. The same thing, they're likely to come in with a lack of enthusiasm at their next job. Another thing that I just wanted to bring up real quickly is most attorneys do get fired at least once in their career, sometimes multiple times, and they learn from that. They learn from the lessons of having gotten fired and they improve. And the odds are that you will be fired at some point in your career. It could be for political reasons. It could be because the law firm doesn't have the work. And instead of admitting that, they will say there's something wrong with your performance and all these sorts of things. But you need to very quickly, anytime you lose a job, you need to go all out and get a new one. And that means things like applying to other markets where there might be opportunities. It means things like applying to lots of firms without openings. And it means doing whatever you can to get a job as quickly as possible. But I'll tell you one thing that, is almost happens like 75% of the time. When someone gets fired at a firm and then they get a new position, they go into that new firm and they're very scared of being fired from the next firm. So they will often start documenting all the things that the firm did wrong with them so they can have a lawsuit if things go wrong, or they will just be angry at the last firm and then they'll take it out on the new firm and often create problems there or quit and other problems. So it's very risky for law firms to hire people that have any type of break on their resume or have been fired, because those people will often not stay very long. And even having a gap as short as a few months can be fatal. Now, I placed this year alone, I would say at least 10 attorneys that have been fired from their last job. Like they had lost their job because they were fired. One guy was fired for not passing the bar twice. Another guy was fired basically because the law firm didn't like his work and he'd gone to an Ivy League law school. And so those candidates were able to find new positions. And there are lots of firms that will hire people like that, but they typically are smaller firms where those smaller firms are having a difficult time finding people. And so they will bring people in that may have some issues with their resume and they're in these breaks. And again, what happens most of the time is those people don't work out. In the one case, replacing one guy that had failed the bar a couple times, and he went into this new firm and was unreachable, wasn't doing assignments on time, and lost his job when he got there. And then the other guy that was from an Ivy League law school would just turn in this work with so little enthusiasm and so little, and he ended up losing his job as well. So it's a big risk for me. It's also a big risk for law firms. But once you leave a law firm voluntarily, that really shows that you may have other priorities. Maybe you don't need to work. Maybe you don't want to work. And it shows that you're not as committed to a law firm as you really should be. And then, of course, anybody that was fired and so forth, that is risky for a firm. So you just need to always keep your eye on the market at all times, know what's going on. And even if you haven't been fired, but you think things are going poorly, you should be always applying to jobs. Like you have absolutely nothing to lose. It's not going to get back to your firm. Firms don't talk about the fact that they received an application from someone in a firm. You should always be applying to jobs before you feel like you're going to lose your job. You just have to be very careful, because most attorneys that have long-term careers practicing law do not have any gaps really in their resume. And so after being fired, people are often very defensive. They are hypersensitive to criticism. There's just all these sorts of issues that law firms experience when they hire people that have been fired. In my career, like I've hired several people to be recruiters that have been fired from positions in good firms, and I was just working in law firms not for them. And when they came to our company, they were problems. And two of them actually set up competing firms with me after being here for less than a year. And they just, when they were unhappy here, they dragged everyone down and they started creating problems. So this often happens with a lot of people that have lost jobs. So you just need to be very careful. And if you feel like you're losing your job, you need to start trying to learn lessons from what happened to you or what's happening. And then you need to always be out there applying for jobs before you're going to lose your job, if you feel like that's something to be concerned about. And I'm a firm believer in, if you believe that there's something you're not comfortable, you feel like you're on the outs, like you feel like you're just not doing well there, you should always be applying to positions to give yourself a chance to not have a gap on your resume. It's very common for attorneys to go in-house and then want to go back. If an attorney goes in-house, that shows that they're probably not happy with the law firm practice setting. And then those attorneys have often left law firms because they want less work, less stress, and to be in a different type of practice setting. I had an attorney I was working with last week, and she was in house, and I was able to get her a job at the law firm. She accepted the job at the law firm, and then prior to her starting work there, I sat down with her for an hour and I talked to her about how you're going to need to go in there and really prove yourself. You're going to need to be often the first one in and last one out for at least a couple of months. You're going to need to really show that you're like the top person there and really commit and try to build the most hours and everything. And for me, it was like a placement where the company would have brought in, I don't know, $50,000 in revenue. She was fairly experienced and she listened to all this and then she thought about it like overnight, and I was just trying to give her a pep talk. And she came back the next day and told the law firm she didn't want to work there, and told me she didn't want to work there. And it was because that she would have all these different demands on her that she wouldn't have had in a different practice setting that she wasn't having in house. So sometimes attorneys and very often go in house because they want less work and all sorts of things. And law firms are very reluctant to hire you if you've gone in house because they know that when you get there, you're unlikely to be happy for whatever reasons you went in house and they're unlikely to succeed. There's been all these periods of time where, for example, Silicon Valley gets extremely busy and they're like hiring, they need corporate attorneys and they're bringing in people from all over the country because there's so much work. But but they're only really interviewing people from law firms. They're not interested in people that went in house at all. Those are like that's their worst nightmare. They don't want that. When it's interesting, there was a big firm in Silicon Valley. I forget the name. It might have been Venture Law Group or I forget the name. But what was happening to them back in starting in 2000 is all of these attorneys were leaving to go in house with startups, and so they couldn't keep attorneys around. So back then, I don't know, the first year associate salaries were like maybe $85,000 or something at the Cravath and other firms. And this firm was Gunderson Detmer. This firm raised their first year associate salaries to 130 because and paid their people that were there very high because all these people were leaving to go in house and they didn't like that because it was affecting their ability to make money. And other law firms started doing the same thing. So once you go in house, it's just you're someone that is a huge risk to hire and they will often go in house again. And then this is something I brought up earlier, but if you are switching firms every few years, that's usually not good. In your early career, you can switch firms. So if you're unhappy or you think you can move to a better firm after a year or so at your first firm, preferably you're going to be most marketable between your second and fifth year. You are given some leeway to do one or two moves during your first 5 years. And often there's good reasons for that. You may be moving to a bigger firm or a better firm or a firm that's more focused on your practice area. But once you start doing too many moves and these moves start happening like on clockwork, like every year and a half to 2 years, or even every year, then law firms are going to know that there's problems with you and that you're unlikely to stay. And it's not a good use of a firm's money to hire someone that's likely to move a lot because for a lot of reasons. But one of the things that most problematic is it takes attorneys a little bit of time to get up to speed once they get to a new firm. So your first few months, you're not as with the firm, you're not proven, and law firms may believe that you're switching firms because you may not be doing the best work and you're getting criticized for it and you don't like that, so you leave. Sometimes people can't take criticism and they feel that they shouldn't be criticized and they should be given positive feedback. Sometimes people have social problems within their firms, like they're unable to relate well to others and be included in the group, which is important. Often they're looking for things in a law firm that doesn't exist. So a lot of times people will move because they say they want to be with a more collegial firm, or they say they want to be at a firm with less hours, or they say they want to all these firm that's going to give them more flexibility to work at home. But every time these serial movers move, they're often going to find reasons to be unhappy at each firm they go to. I remember I was at a dinner with my ex-wife and one of her candidates years ago, And she had placed him at Winston& Strawn in Los Angeles, which is a great firm. And he had gone to University of Chicago Law School and had done very well. And he had left his first firm for some inconsequential reasons, but he'd gotten hired at Winston& Strawn because he had a really good background, and it was his first move. And then he got to Winston& Strawn and he was there for a year and then asked her to meet with him. And so I went out to dinner with the two of them, and he wanted to move because that Winston& Strawn made all the associates to save money, like park in a parking garage across the street from the office instead of a very expensive parking garage that was costing them $300 a month or something. And so he wanted to move for things like that. And so that obviously is just crazy, but a lot of people move for those reasons. And one of the things that I've noticed a lot of, and this happens quite a bit, sometimes people will actually move because they like the attention. They like the attention from recruiters. They like the attention from interviewers. They like going to a new firm because everything's new and it's exciting. And this is something that often happens to early career attorneys. But regardless, once a law firm sees that instability in your resume, they know that you're likely to have the same instability at the next firm you go to, and law firms will avoid you. Even if there's really good explanations for each move, they again have the choice of hiring someone that, especially large firms, that hasn't moved a lot as opposed to you, and they will always hire the person that hasn't moved a lot. And the firms that pay the most have a lot of options. Another one that people do all the time, and I see this every day, like attorneys will apply to work with BCG, and they may be in one practice area and trying to switch practice areas. And maybe they really want to do that practice area, or maybe they think that doing another practice area will make them happier practicing law. And it can often work. Like, for example, if you're currently a corporate attorney in a law firm and you did nothing but before going to law school, you worked in entertainment companies, and then you really want to get into entertainment, you're not doing it. Sometimes people will have compelling reasons for wanting to move into a new practice area, but if you put yourself in the shoes of a law firm that's hiring someone that wants to switch practice areas, why would they hire someone for a job that wants to go into a new practice area compared to someone that is already doing that practice area? It's a no-brainer if you think about it. If an attorney does switch practice areas, in most cases, when they do that at a new firm, they're unlikely to be unhappy as well. So if that's something that you're trying to do, it's very difficult to get a firm to bite unless you're moving to a firm that is much smaller and much less prestigious, and honestly is in the part of the country or something that makes it almost impossible for them to find attorneys. Then you'll get hired. But other than that, it can be not a good thing. Another thing that happens to a lot of attorneys is they will start in large law firms, and then they'll move to a smaller law firm, and then an even smaller law firm. And oftentimes these moves may be motivated by the desire for fewer hours, fewer politics, and a more collegial environment. However, once that becomes obvious that the person keeps moving to smaller and smaller law firms, it shows that they're unlikely to work out wherever they go next either. What law firms like to see, so when I make placements, I will probably 80% of the placements I make are for attorneys that are actually looking like they're moving up in their careers, meaning there's something about whatever they're doing is moving up, whether it's to, even if they're moving sideways to a firm the same size, it might be a boutique that's doing all of one thing, or something that's going to give them something better than where they're at. So an example would be just this morning, I placed a trust and estates attorney. He was at a large firm, like a mid-sized firm, a very good brand firm, and he was doing trust and estates for them, but he was part of a practice group within this mid-sized firm, and the firm did not specialize in trust and estates. So he moved to a smaller firm that did only trust and estates, and that firm actually liked that. That would be a positive move. But if you're continually moving to smaller and smaller law firms, it often is a sign that there's something that you're doing wrong, and because of something that you're doing wrong, like you continually need to move to smaller and smaller law firms in order to stay employed. So that can be something that also harms you. Then again, I talked about entrepreneurs in the beginning, but you need to be very careful about listing that stuff on your resume. So people that list too much of this stuff and it makes them look like too much of an entrepreneur often aren't going to be happy in law firms. Lawyers are not entrepreneurs for the most part, and they will start entrepreneurial law firms. They'll be entrepreneurs starting law firms, but they don't have an interest in starting. Typically, ones that are true entrepreneurs don't have an interest in working in law firms. They don't want to do any job where they're paid by the hour. They're more interested in doing things that are, that are entrepreneurial in nature, whether it's like selling products or starting tech companies and things like that. And then other times, the law firms will hire people that don't aspire to be with the social level, have no interest in being a partner in a law firm. So they're only there for a few years and they don't have that sort of drive it takes to be a partner. I had a candidate that I was working with. It was actually very sad. He went to the University of North Carolina Law School and did very well there. And he was at a firm in North Carolina, an AmLaw firm in the real estate department. And there were like 5 other people with him in his class. And after he'd been there for like about a year, like he wasn't getting positive feedback from the firm and things weren't really going that well for him. And he sat down with someone and a partner and he asked them like, what am I doing wrong? And they just basically said, you don't have the drive and determination it's going to take to be a partner. It's pretty obvious at this stage in your career that you don't have this. And because of that, we don't think your heart's not in this. And so any place you go, like your heart needs to be in it. Like you need to be someone that is just your heart's in it. You want to advance. And if law firms see that you don't have that, then they're going to want to keep people there that kind of have that drive and determination. And you can't expect to move up firms in terms of the prestige level or do very well at wherever you're at if you don't have that drive, because without that drive, you're just basically not going to be putting in the effort, not going to be as enthusiastic and not as happy. And this guy was interesting. I got him a job at another firm, like kind of a mid-sized firm. And after he'd been unemployed for several months, and he got this job. And then after he got it, I thought I'd put his career back on track. He actually turned it down and went to work for one of his friends that was starting a litigation firm. And I just thought that was crazy because he said, if I go to this next firm, I'm going to have the same problem. I'm not going to be driven and I'm not going to want to do it. So if you're not driven like that and that comes across, then you're going to have a very hard time being successful. So you need to go into everything with a sense of very massive commitment, because those are the people that do well. Those are the people that advance. And frankly, that's what is expected of you as a young attorney in a law firm, is to be someone that's very committed and if you're and wants to advance. Because if you don't, then you're just not going to be doing work or committed at the same level. And it's not what law firms want. And then sometimes attorneys will move to firms that are trivial for reasons that are trivial. I talked about that a little bit earlier, like moving parking and things. But if those are the reasons you're moving, then obviously then there's going to be trivial reasons at the next employer. Again, being unhappy with your past employer. Sometimes people will sue employers. Once you do that, your career is over. You just can't do that. Sometimes you may have a very serious suit about sexual harassment or something, where you will recover enough money to live for the rest of your life. But barring serious things, a lot of times people will sue firms just because they got fired and make things up. And that will harm them for the rest of their career and make it extremely difficult for them to get employed, because law firms can very easily look up your record. And if there's a record of you filing lawsuits, they will find that. And then there's other attorneys that often have substance abuse issues. That's also fairly easy to spot. Many times their work quality will suffer, but there are attorneys that I know of that continually move firms as their substance abuse problems become obvious. So that's just a small thing to bring up. And then another thing is people that aggressively negotiate salary when they get hired. You certainly can negotiate your salary to some extent. You want to be paid what other people at your class level are paid. But if a law firm pays you a high salary that you negotiate that maybe they don't want to pay, then they will think we deserve a lot extra from this person. If they're not getting it, and they feel like they're spending too much money, then they will often be looking to replace you with someone who's cheaper. So you need to be very careful about how much you negotiate salary. Now, sometimes you can negotiate salary pretty aggressively because the law firm may need you, and the law firm may realize that there's not a lot of people in your market that they can hire that are as qualified as you, and they do need to pay more. So I had a situation with a attorney about a week ago, and he was a very skilled attorney in personal injury and working for a law firm and getting paid. I think he was getting paid at his current firm $175,000 a year. And he applied to work for a firm and they wanted to pay him $125,000 a year. I was able to negotiate his salary up to 175 because they couldn't find anybody like that on the market and they needed to pay that salary. So instead of taking this $125,000 offer and saying no, he was able to negotiate a salary. So you can drastically negotiate your salary if you're in a practice area and in a location where law firms can't find people like you and they need you. So it's definitely possible to negotiate, but a lot of times people will nickel and dime firms in a way that they don't like. And when the firm gets a sense that you're there for more for the salary as opposed to the work, then they start to get nervous because you need to go into interviews and communicate to law firms that the reason you're there is because of the work and the opportunity, not necessarily your short-term salary. And most law firms, all law firms, if you're doing a really good job and providing them a lot of value, will instinctively feel like they need to pay you more money. So it's often in your best interest to get into a firm and become indispensable and do really good work before trying to negotiate your salary. And the way to negotiate it would just basically to say things like, my friends that are in the same practice area at similar firms are getting paid this. I would appreciate if you're doing a really good job, if you can consider me for something like this. You don't demand it, but then often you will be able to get, you'll be able to get a higher salary. So you just need to be very careful about how you do that. And again, in your first 5 years of practice, your job really is to get as much experience as you possibly can to get paid for your experience, whatever that is, because you will get the tools in your practice area. The more experience you get, that will last you like the rest of your career. So you definitely want to be in a situation where you're more concerned about getting trained, you're more concerned about getting the access to the type of work you want than your salary. And then this is just another one that often that creates problems. Now, there are people wanting to reduce schedules. Are to some extent, it's very accepted for working mothers, for example, that have kids. But often, if you're trying to negotiate something like this, especially if you're not a mother and have reasons for doing that, law firms often don't like that. Negotiating a reduced salary is often something that is better for you to do once you're employed rather than when you're trying to get the job, because again, you always need to put yourself in the situation, in the shoes of the employer, because the employer is going to want to hire someone that wants to work full time, and because that's how they make money. So once you start negotiating, if you try to do that at the outset, the law firm is going to prefer to hire someone that doesn't want that as opposed to someone that wants that. Now, I place women all the time that need reduced schedules, but the law firms also want to feel like you're fully committed, because that level of commitment is going to translate into the type of hours you need to be a partner. It's going to translate into you being available for all sorts of things that they need. And law firms don't always have a lot of work, but when they do have a lot of work, they want people to be able to work very hard when they're there and not have to worry about people having reduced schedules. And then sometimes, a lot of times, people will have all these jobs on their resumes after graduating from law school that have nothing to do with practicing law. People will take jobs doing just things that don't have anything to do with practicing law. And again, like if a law firm sees that in your resume, then they're unlikely to want to hire you. They want people that have stability. So if you do take jobs that have nothing to do with practice and law, then that's going to typically harm you in the long run. It's going to show that you're not interested as much in practicing law in a law firm. And because of that, they're going to avoid you. So you need to be very careful about that. And then the other big thing that people do, and this is something again that most attorneys do on their resumes, and I don't know why, but this is something, if you eliminate this from your resume, which 80% of attorneys do have on their resume, I don't know why, but I do know why, because it's important to them. But if you have things on your resume that suggest anything other that could be the least bit polarizing, then it's going to always hurt you in terms of being able to get a position. Because if you want to list that you're a Democrat or Republican or something else, or you want to associate yourself with social justice, or if you want to have a lot of stuff on there about pro bono, if you put yourself on the side of one political party, then you're going to alienate the half of the firm or whatever it is, or half of the firms that you're applying to that may not like that. You may find firms that like that and bring you in, but you're going to eliminate half the firms. So you really don't want anything on there about that. Oftentimes people will write papers about things that are likely to create firms problems. Like they'll talk about how people need special accommodations, or how to find different types of racism based on, they'll just do all these things that put them on the side of a political issue. People will even do that with religions. They'll list things that have to do with the religions. I saw one guy, I don't really feel comfortable talking about it, but I had one candidate that was applying, had great qualifications, and another one that had almost the exact same qualifications. It was applying for jobs in New York. And the one guy listed all this stuff having to do with the Muslim Students Association and these Muslim interests, and the other person didn't have anything like that. And the guy that had all this Muslim stuff didn't get interviews. And I keep seeing this like time and time again. Like I'll have two similar candidates, and one may list the member of the Muslim Law Students Association or whatever, the Christian Law Students Association, whatever they're putting on their resume that could be polarizing to some people, and ethnic group associations, religious associations. And that can actually hurt you, because there are people that are racist. There are people that have all these opinions about different types of people. And you're better off just getting in there based on the quality of your work and looking like you really want to work there based on all of these types of associations and so forth. I had another candidate that was absolutely exceptional. He'd been at the top of his class at an Ivy League law school, and had gotten a job at a very good firm after graduation, and then became like this very strong gay activist, and put it on his resume. It was on a one-page resume like 25 times. And in terms of papers he wrote, what else? Pro bono activities he'd done, associations he joined while practicing law, all these different things. And he wasn't getting interviews, and didn't really understand why. And it was because it looked like something was more of a priority to him than just practicing law. And that's okay. It doesn't work necessarily in law firms that are all concerned with business. Because if you look at the resumes of people that tend to get the most interviews and tend to get hired the most, none of that stuff is on there. And because all you're doing is painting yourself into a corner. And your political beliefs may be very important, but if you're highlighting those on your resume, then your political beliefs are probably going to impact how you see working for different clients. So if you are someone that's against big corporations and it shows up on your resume, then how are you going to feel working for large corporations? Or if you're on the side of a certain political issue, like how is that going to impact clients and maybe polluters or whatever it is? You just need to be very careful. You need to look neutral, because that's what lawyers have to be when they represent clients. And law firms do not want to hire people that are on the side of a political issue. And one of the sadder things I ever saw was, I was working with this woman that went to Stanford Law School, and when she graduated, when she was in law school, she couldn't get a job with a law firm. And then after she'd been out a year or so, she'd been working for some sort of public interest organization, and she had this incredible resume. Like she graduated first in her class from UCLA or something before going to Stanford Law School, but she had all this information about being a rape survivor, which is, a horrible thing, but it just was making people uncomfortable. Anything that you do that could possibly make people uncomfortable doesn't work. If you list a bunch of papers you wrote on your resume that have nothing to do with the law, for example, that doesn't work. If you list fraternities and sororities on your resume, there's people that don't like fraternities and sororities, like that doesn't work. So your resume just needs to look very neutral, and like not something that prioritizes other things. And that's just how it works. It's just what law firms want to hire, people that look focused. And then sometimes people want to move to different areas of the country because of things that they like skiing in Colorado or whatever, sun in Los Angeles. And law firms typically are very similar in different areas of the country. if you emphasize reasons like that for moving, it certainly can work. But in the experience of law firms, when people try to do that very often, it doesn't work out. People will move to different areas of the country, assuming that things are happier in Seattle or things are more mellow in Colorado. And for the most part, most law firms are the same. They're driven by making money. The law firm is not going to be much different wherever they move. And then sometimes people will move to smaller firms under the belief that it's going to be fewer hours and responsibility. That often is the case because smaller law firms often don't have as much work. So they will have fewer hours. But what always happens is that if the law firm does bring in big matters that require a lot of work, then people will have to do a lot of work. And law firms are profit making businesses. And so they only make money to the extent that people do a lot of work. You often are going to be disappointed if you move to other types of reasons. And then sometimes attorneys will also move because they're dead set on only doing one specific type of work. So meaning they only want to do one type of litigation, or they only want to do one type of transactional work. And then if they're given that work outside of that, they become very unhappy. If an attorney comes in with those sorts of expectations, law firms aren't going to do that because they want people to work on different types of matters as opposed to like only one. So if they don't have the work, they're going to want you to work on different types of things. And then again, being fired from your last job isn't helpful. Again, that's something you need to avoid talking about. So again, this is just a quick conclusion. Anytime an attorney a law firm gets an application, they want to see what are the arguments for not hiring an attorney. So they're going to look at your resume very critically. If they find reasons for not wanting to hire you, which you often do on your resume, then you're going to not get a job. One way to think about your resume is I had an experience early on when I was trying to become a really good student in college. I remember talking to this professor that I couldn't get to give me anything above a B plus, and I really wanted to get an A in his class. And he said, the way to get an A is when you write a paper that I don't have to disagree, call your arguments wrong, or say things that are wrong with it. I can just read through it and I don't have to make a lot of comments. And if I do that, it's going to be like an A. And it's the same thing when you're writing law school exams. If someone can look at it and there's not a lot of arguments they can make against it, then you're more likely to get a good grade in law school. So you need to make sure that when you're doing anything, that your resume, for one, doesn't give people arguments to make against you. And then when you interview with people, it's the same thing. What else here? Yeah, so it's very difficult for law firms to hire people. Again, most law firms will interview 8 people for every offer they make. The reason always is because when they interview people, there's arguments against them, whether it's their passion, whether how things come across on the resume, whether the things they say. And so you always want to avoid these things. And I think this, hopefully, if you took notes on this and really understood what I'm talking about, it can dramatically change the path of your career because over 80% of attorneys are making these mistakes. And because they're making these mistakes, it's hurting them and it's not getting them interviews and it's stopping their careers many times. And it's making them not have jobs when they lose them and all sorts of things. You really need to do whatever you can to avoid this stuff. And there's a lot of competition in the legal profession. It's arguably the most competitive profession that there is because it's not in medicine, but there's like a limited number of doctors and there's a very high barrier to entry. Law schools pump out far more attorneys than law firms need. And so because of that, you have to make all these decisions and things that I've talked about so far. And because law firms have so many options when hiring people, and the people that they do hire, and especially at the highest levels of the legal profession, are people that are not going to be making these mistakes in their interviews and on their resumes because they can always find people. And again, this stuff is a lot of what I've talked about today is actually, for most people, is counterintuitive. Like they think they need to list all of these different things on their resume. Another big one is people will not really show a commitment to their practice areas. So each job will talk about all these different practice areas instead of one. And law firms are only hiring people to be experts in one practice area. They don't have jobs for people that do 5 different practice areas, only one practice area. So you need to do all these things to make yourself look really good. And the good news is that all of these things are fixable. And if you're able to fix them, then you're going to have a much better career than if you don't. You're going to get more jobs. You're going to have a roadmap on your resume and then the things that you think about that are going to help you definitely advance in the legal profession. We'll take a quick break, just like for 2 or 3 minutes. And then when I come back, I'll answer questions. I will answer questions about anything that you may have today. It doesn't matter what the issue is. I will make sure that I go through every question that you may have so I can answer them. Sometimes questions can be about things you don't think are important, but they will probably be important to someone on the call. There's a lot of people here. Any questions you have that you would like answers to, I can help you. It doesn't have to be just about what we talked about today. It can be really about anything. So I love answering questions. It's one of my favorite points in the week because I get to see what people are thinking. And I will be back in just like less than 2 minutes and we'll do questions. Thank you. Just give me 1 second. Let me see if I can, I just want to see real quickly if I can have the ability to put something in a chat. Give me 1 second here. More Q&A chat. Doesn't look like I do, but I do have that I'll be sending everyone some information about this week. I do have a video that I made that you might enjoy. It goes into a lot of detail about kind of the steps that people, well, let me just show you here. Give me 1 second. I'm showing it. It goes into quite a bit of detail about the steps that people need to take in order to move from wherever you are now into a big law firm. And it talks about how other people have been able to do it. So it's a free training and it may be something that's helpful to you. I will try to send an email to people maybe after this webinar with information about it, but this is something that could be pretty helpful to you. So I put that up on the screen and just find my Q&A page again. And so people, you may want to look at that because that can help you quite a bit if you're thinking about if you want to move into a larger law firm and want to know the way that other people have done it and how I've helped other people doing it. A lot of questions about no volume. I apologize for that. Okay, so the first question is, how can you tell if a firm has low morale before joining them? You often can't. Sometimes one of the things to ask them is what happened to anybody that you may be replacing. You can often pick that up from when you're interviewing, for example, with associates, like how happy they seem if you're interviewing as an associate. And partners can often pick it up as well when they're interviewing places. Partners can pick it up usually by a lot of moves, a lot of people leaving the firm and so forth. There's different ways that people can pick it up. But generally, in order to see if there's low morale in the firm, you're going to figure it out based on talking to people. Often it's not the best use of your time to review negative reviews from firms. Like that's not finding things online like in Glassdoor or BCG that people are saying negative things about a firm isn't necessarily going to help you, because typically the people that have negative things to say about a firm are the people that haven't done good work there, lost their job, and have sour grapes. But you can often pick that up when you're interviewing from associates and so forth. And you certainly can read negative reviews, but again, those are typically not going to be something that's going to help you a lot in terms of deciding how to work there. And honestly, I wouldn't even review negative reviews until you've gotten an offer somewhere, because you don't want it to frame how you think about the firm going into the interviews, because if you're thinking negatively about them, they'll pick up on it. And law firms, if they did have morale problems or were trying to fix them, are often because people were kept around that probably shouldn't have been. Large law firms have the ability to pretty quickly push out people that are bad for morale, as opposed to smaller firms that may need to keep them around because they don't have anybody else to do the work. So you need to be careful about morale and stuff and understanding it. And typically, all these sorts of questions you should really think about at the point after you get an offer, as opposed to before you get an offer. And you can usually pick up on this stuff. Most people can. With morale, you can get a sense of how enthusiastic the people at the front desk are, how the law firm interacts with you when you're interviewing. But all these sorts of things can give you a sense of it. And typically, people can pick up on a lot of things that you're not necessarily going to learn directly. You can pick up on it by the language people use, how happy people seem, the enthusiasm they seem to have, or the opposite. When you see the opposite, that's not good, and how comfortable you feel around the people. So if you're uncomfortable with people that you're interviewing with, the chances are there's a reason for that. Maybe they don't like their jobs, or maybe it's just a bad fit. And you should definitely try to avoid, if you have the option, firms that make you uncomfortable. Okay, next question is someone transitioning from a niche practice area to a more general one? How can I frame my skills and background to align with what firms value? Should I emphasize adaptability? Are there other traits that resonate more with hiring partners? I don't know how niche your practice area is, but typically you're better off being in a niche practice area than a general one. The reason for that is because most attorneys are not in niche practice. Well, actually, most attorneys in law firms are in fairly niche practice areas, and being in a niche practice area means that you are getting a lot of experience in one thing, and clients like that more. So just imagine if you had pancreatic cancer, and it's a life-threatening disease, and you wanted to find a doctor to help you, or if you didn't, you might be told you're going to die in 4 months. So would you try to find some guy that was a doctor that's a generalist and does a little bit of pancreatic cancer, general cancer, and maybe bladder cancer? I don't know. Or would you want to find someone that has been doing the same thing, like only pancreatic cancer, since they got out of medical school? They did a residency in it, they did a fellowship, then they worked in some hospital doing nothing but that for 10 years or 20 years, and they've written all these papers and so forth. Like that would be who you would hire. And so law firms will typically want people in niche practice areas, because that's something that's better to offer to their clients, because clients will want people that have experience typically only in one practice area. And the more niche practice, the better, because their person's more learned in that practice area. The person is likely to 5 years of experience in niche practice area is much different than 5 years of experience doing 3 different practice areas, which arguably would only be 1.5 years of experience in niche practice area. So you should always try to be in a niche practice area to the extent you could or can. The other piece of advice that I would give you about the resumes that are most likely to convert to get interviews and offers are people that make their resume only look about one practice area. So you may have been doing like real estate, corporate, and I don't know, employment law at your first firm, and then doing corporate employment and litigation, your second firm. And then at your next firm, you're doing just corporate. Your resume, if you wanted to have a corporate job, would only talk about your corporate experience, your previous 3 firms. And if you weren't even doing corporate at your first firm, you might just say you're an associate because you want everything on your resume to talk about that practice area, even down to the grades you emphasize you got in law school, if you want to put that on your resume, or to the associations you were part of. And if you had jobs prior to law school, if they didn't have anything to do with corporate law, you would just want to basically say the title of whatever you did and then emphasize it. Same thing with your summer jobs. Like you're trying to be a corporate lawyer and your summer jobs are about litigation, you would just basically say, I was a summer associate or I was an intern. You don't want to talk about anything that has nothing to do with your niche practice area, because if you do that, you're suddenly going to be limiting yourself to working with firms that are doing multiple things. And firms that are doing multiple things typically aren't as profitable and don't have the best clients. And without that, they're going to be much harder places to advance in. So if you are transitioning to a more general practice area, my suggestion would be to do it within your practice area. So like right now, if you're doing corporate M&A, then you want to transition into corporate general, that's okay. That's more of a generalist practice area, but you're still under the umbrella of one practice area. If you're doing, I don't know, like environmental litigation, you're transitioning to general litigation, that's okay too, because they're both litigation, but you want to make sure that you look like you're focused on doing litigation. That's what I would recommend. I do think that being in a niche practice area is the best, but there's some exceptions to that. So as you move away from the largest law firms, people are typically going to be less specialized and doing more generalist work. At the lowest end, you have solo practitioners like in small markets, like that are doing everything. And then as you move up the food chain, even if you get into, say you were working in Oklahoma City and you're a corporate attorney, you would probably be doing corporate generalist work as opposed to just corporate M&A, because that's what the clients there need. If they want M&A, they'll go to like a big firm in Chicago or something. So you always want to emphasize to be as niche as possible. But if the market you're in doesn't do that, or if the size firm you're in doesn't do, that's okay. You can be, but you need to fall under one major practice area category, which would be like corporate or litigation, or if you want to do environmental, just environmental. If you want to do labor and employment, just you need to be focused under a main practice area, because that's what clients hire. That's how you're going to get business. That's what law firms hire. And it's very difficult to be a generalist and command like decent fees from clients and then to look like the obvious choice when someone's looking for someone to do a certain type of work. Okay, this person says, this next question, I am in England. Do Silicon Valley firms hire from the London market? First of all, anytime you're trying to do any type of move to a firm, you need to look at it from the firm standpoint. There are lots of cases where people from England get hired in firms in New York, and people from Canada get hired from firms in New York and Silicon Valley. It's definitely possible. It's not something that by any stretch of the imagination is impossible. The biggest issue with that is you have to think about what's the firm's point of view. So if they're moving someone from England to Silicon Valley, the first thing you probably have to think about is getting the bar exam, but then they'll have to sponsor you to do the work, which sometimes that sponsorship is only for a couple of years. So they're going to sponsor you after that. So that's a risk. And then you're from another country, so your family's going to be in another country. So that's a risk. And then you're also competing with attorneys that are from already in Silicon Valley. If there's enough attorneys already in Silicon Valley, like what is their incentive to hire you? So their only incentive to hire you is going to be if they don't have enough attorneys in that market. And there have been times in history where law firms do not have enough attorneys in a given market. And because they don't have enough attorneys in a given market, they will hire from foreign countries. And it's more common than not. It definitely can happen. But at the same time, you also need to be in a practice area that law firms that trained in a practice area that US law firms need. So what are those practice areas? There are attorneys in London that are doing like US capital markets work. And so if you were to get US capital markets work experience in London at a big like Magic Circle firm, for example, then you would have experience that could translate into working for a US law firm. But again, you just need to keep in mind, like, what are their incentives? They also don't understand grades and so forth that you may have gotten working for going to school in London or in England as opposed to going to the US. They don't understand like how people sort, and they have a very good understanding of what it means to go to certain law schools and get certain grades in the US. So that can be something that you need to think about. But everything generally comes down to law, supply, and demand. So what are your drawbacks and what are your benefits? There was one law firm in Los Angeles that actually did very well for a period of years, like hiring LLMs from Harvard, and then would hire them after they took the bar exam, got these LLMs and to work for them in Los Angeles. And for them, it was actually a benefit because those law firms were finding people that would come there and be very committed. That was the only place to really hire them. They knew if they didn't get a new job, they would have to go back. They were making much more money than they would ever make in their home countries. And so that was a very smart move for them. So there are law firms that do that, but for the most part, it can be very difficult if you're an attorney from another country to move to another market just for kind of the reasons that I said. And a lot of people, it's a shame because there are some really good programs out there that people can go to that will give them the degree, for example, that's necessary to work in the United States, but people spend a lot of money to go to these schools. They may spend $120,000 or something for a year under the belief that they're going to be very marketable US law firms. But the problem is that they're not because they're from a foreign country and law firms don't have a lot of incentive to hire people from a foreign country, especially when they don't understand the grading system. They don't understand the quality of the firms that they may have come from. They don't understand the quality of work that they may have done. And the type of law and the type of work that they did isn't necessarily translatable into getting a good job in the US. It doesn't, the firms don't know. So that can create problems. So some firms will create these 2-year, 1-year foreign associate programs, but usually those don't translate into anything. What you can do if you're from a foreign country and you really want to work in the US, the smartest thing you can do is to come over to the US and get an LLM, and then during your LLM program, apply to get a JD from a US law school. And then when you get a JD from a US law school, you typically want to get in to the very best law school you can, which means you probably need to do very well on your LSATs and hopefully be able to explain that you got very good grades during your undergraduate studies wherever you came from, and then get into a really good law school, the best one you can, and then rank highly there. And then if you're able to do that, regardless of the fact that you're from a foreign country, you can suddenly find yourself being able to get into all these law firms that would be close to you. There's lots of LLMs and people that come over to get LLMs in the US every year. And some of them even do LLM programs remotely, but it's very difficult. It's not impossible, but it's very close to impossible to get jobs from those unless you end up getting a US JD, or just sometimes people get very lucky. You can also often apply to small law firms that US attorneys aren't applying to in smaller markets, and that can help. Okay, you talked about how firms sometimes see red flags in a candidate's history, like frequent job changes or gaps in employment. What's the best way to proactively address these concerns in interviews or cover letters? Are there specific phrases for framing techniques that might help mitigate these issues? No, the most important thing that you would do on your resume if there's frequent job changes is you would try to emphasize that wherever you were getting experience in one practice area, it looks good if you're moving from smaller law firms to larger law firms because it shows a period of upward mobility. Law firms, you don't want to ever explain in cover letters why you moved. They're not, because again, all they're doing is they're going to evaluate your resume based on the best resumes they receive. So if there's attorneys that don't have as many moves, then they're more likely to interview them than you. But when you do get interviews, a lot of times when a law firm is bringing you in for an interview, they're bringing you in regardless of this. They may not be ultimately that concerned. They'll interview you based on whether they like you and if you seem enthusiastic and you do all those things. But then what they will do, and I had this experience happen this week as well, or no, last week and this week actually. Then what they will do is then they will want to see your references. So then they will call your references and attempt to see how you did at these jobs. And that's their way of getting reassurance that you are someone that's worth hiring. So even if there are the job changes, they're willing to accept that sometimes attorneys get off to a little bit rocky start in their careers. It's very common for attorneys to do things like fail the bar a couple times and not get a job until they've been out of school for half a year or whatever, and then get a job and then move up and then continually improve. So people understand that you may have had early bumps in your career and things that went wrong, but what they ultimately usually will do will be to check your references, especially the better the firm, the more likely they'll do that. So it's always a good idea when you've had frequent job changes to always to leave a very good taste in people's mouth, to make them like you, to not make problems, and to wherever you go, do the best job you can, because law firms are going to be more likely to hire you if people say good things about you. And that's typically how law firms will do that. They will get references from people, and even solo practitioners will often do that if they're hiring people that have had multiple career moves. So you just always need to be very careful about making sure that you get the best references possible. I mean, that you do a good job wherever you're at. And if you're switching jobs, you want to make sure you have very good reasons that you have people that are going to be different types or that are going to be good references. Okay, personalities seem to be a key theme in the discussion. How can attorneys who are naturally introverted demonstrate the personal skills that firms care about? Are there specific techniques or examples of successful introverts who've excelled in law firm environments? Yes, introverts can do great in a law firm environment. As a matter of fact, they're some of the most valuable people to law firms, because in law firms, you have typically three types of people. You have grinders, and then you have minders, and then you have binders. And so those are people have one of three skills. And so a grinder is just someone that kind of does all the work, and they're workhorses and they get things done. And that's how law firms make money. You have minders that tend to be administrative people, partners in administrative roles, the administrative staff that kind of make sure everybody's doing their work and things are going well. And then you have binders, who are people that typically bring in business and form relationships. So introverts are totally valuable in a law firm. Law firms are perfectly happy having introverts to do the work. That's exactly what they need. They need people that will carry out assignments. It's very typical for partners and law firms, large and small, to be out there generating work and then having people that are just churning out all the work for them. That's exactly what law firms need. So being an introvert is actually a very good skill to have. Now even introverts can, if they do really good work, they can develop business later in their careers. But yes, being a grinder or introvert is something that is actually valued by law firms. And if you're like, that's exactly what most law firms or even small law firms need. They need people that are going to do the work. When any law firm has any type of work that needs to be done, they want people that are just pushing out the work. And that's exactly what they need. They need that. Large law firms need partners that are nothing but grinders that have very good skills. Everybody needs people that are introverts to do the work. It's one of the most valuable types of attorneys in law firms. And the better you are at it, often the farther you can go. Now, it's hard in a lot of the largest law firms where you're given a 7 to 10 year runway to make partner to do nothing but that, but you can still succeed doing that. And that's something that law firms do need. Let's see here. You talked about how personal fulfillment in a law firm is tied to compatibility with the law firm's environment. How do you suggest attorneys evaluate a firm's culture before accepting offers? Are there red flags we should be mindful of during the interview process or initial conversation with partners? So every organization that you go into, you will feel neutral, or you'll feel very comfortable, or you'll feel uncomfortable. If you feel uncomfortable when you're interviewing with a law firm, there may be just all sorts of unarticulable reasons for that. You just may not mesh with the people. They may not mesh with you. Things you say they don't like, or vice versa. And so that would be the place where you're incompatible. And a lot of attorneys, they join law firms that don't have the type of culture and the type of people in them that make them happy and or make them feel comfortable, and then they don't like being there. And it's sad, because if they were to go into a firm that valued people like them or where they fit in, they would be much more successful. So you need to just always keep in mind that regardless of wherever you're interviewing, that if you don't feel comfortable there, then the odds are you're going to feel uncomfortable if you're hired. And most law firms are also very aware of that. So if a law firm's interviewing you and you don't seem like you fit in, they will not hire you. They may hire you if they don't have any other options, but you really do need to fit in or feel comfortable there and vice versa. And the reason that you may not be comfortable is the same reason that you wouldn't be comfortable with certain groups of friends. You need to find people who are compatible with the type of person you are. And that's just very important. If you do that, then you're going to be much happier. And finding an environment like that is extremely important because you spend a lot of time at work and being around people you're comfortable with is a big part of it. Also, when you're comfortable around people, they like you better and they give you better assignments and you're more likely to advance. Where if it's the opposite, you're not going to do well. You really do need to try to find an environment you're comfortable with. Now, the environment you're comfortable with can be all sorts of things. It can be working in just a different top firm. Different top firms have different cultures. It can be something as simple as working in a smaller market sometimes or a larger market. You may be comfortable in a faster moving market, or you may be more comfortable in a smaller market. There's all sorts of things that can affect how comfortable you are in a market. So you need to do whatever you can to find either a market or a firm or someplace where you're comfortable. And sometimes I've seen attorneys move from some of the largest law firms in the world to do work for very small firms, just a few individuals where they feel comfortable and they advance. Because when you're comfortable wherever you're working, everything's much easier. The work's easier. You can ask for input more easily. People are more likely to protect you. You're part of a group, and when you're not part of a group, it can be very isolating. Just if you tried to be you're a member of some organization. Say you're a Republican and you joined a Democratic organization. You might not like that. It's the same thing with attorneys. Like they want to surround themselves with, they like minded people need to work together, and that's important. And thanks for all these questions. These are great questions today. Thank you. One point that stood out to me was how law firms assess an attorney's potential long-term satisfaction. From your experience, what role does an attorney's specialization or practice area play in this evaluation? Should someone considering a lateral move place more weight on the firm's reputation and their practice area overall work environment? So ultimately, what is going to make you the most marketable throughout your career is going to be you becoming an expert in a certain practice area. The more of an expert you are in your practice area, the more opportunities that you will have to move to other firms, the more opportunities you will have to bring in clients, and the better attorney you will be. So someone that does nothing but, I don't know, tax controversy throughout their whole career and not other types of tax is going to be a better tax controversy attorney than someone that does other types of tax. So you always want to be as specialized as you can be, and hopefully working with people in your law firm that are specialized that you're comfortable with. An important point to consider is you may not be necessarily comfortable with the overall vibe of the firm that you're thinking about working with, but you may actually be very comfortable in that practice area. So different firms have different reputations. Some of them may have people say bad things about them, but they're in other practice areas than when you're joining. So ultimately, the attorneys you're going to be working with are going to be the ones that are in your practice area. Making sure that you are comfortable with them and that you're getting a really good experience in your practice area is important. And I can't emphasize enough, I know I've talked about this several times today, but the more of an expert you are in your practice area, the farther you're going to be able to go in your career. You do want to specialize. Specialized attorneys get more jobs. They're more valuable in the market. They're more able to get clients. They're more able to set up their own practice area, practice their own law firms. And I've seen people do this time and time again. I knew one woman that she was working for an IP firm and she started doing these agreements with software services companies when she was there. But she wasn't doing a lot of them. This was one service they offer, but they did a lot of different things in IP. And then she started her own firm doing nothing but this. And when people search for someone like her on Google, she literally came up first. So she's getting all of these clients from all over the country and world that wanted these software services agreements. And because she was so specialized in that practice area, she suddenly was in this great situation where she had this law firm that was grossing over $1 million a year just based on her work. She never the associates and everything. They can be very profitable to be specialized in any practice area. I know people that do nothing but immigration and are very successful. There's all these practice areas and do immigration for just people with special talents trying to immigrate to the United States. If you get experience, really good experience in one practice area, you can be very successful. How can attorneys better communicate their firm's value and mission, especially if it's not immediately obvious from the resume? Are there specific questions we should be asking during interviews to determine if a firm will genuinely support our professional growth and happiness? Firms are just what they are. It's nothing, they're not going to bend to support your professional growth and happiness. I think that the most important thing for you to just figure out when you're interviewing with a firm is, what do I feel comfortable around these people? Can I see myself getting along with these types of people? Because it's the same thing like with dating or something. You will meet people and you'll just realize you're incompatible. You don't know why. I mean, it could be a bunch of different reasons, but you realize you're incompatible. So when you're interviewing with firms, you just want to see, do I feel compatible with these people? And the more compatible you feel, the better off you'll do. And firms where you're compatible with people generally will support your professional growth. Now, your professional growth can mean a lot of things. It can mean you becoming a better attorney, or I don't know what you mean by professional growth, or having a long-term career. But most of the time, it should mean getting experience that's very good in your practice area. And the more specialized that experience is, typically, the better off you'll be. And I can't emphasize enough, and I talked about this a lot today, but the importance of looking specialized in your practice area, continually looking more and more specialized, just all very important things that you need to have a successful career. Being a generalist is just not going to help you. It's one reason, like when people go in-house, they tend to become generalists as opposed to specialists. So not only are they in a different practice setting, but now they're generalists as opposed to specialists. And law firms, that's not most often what you want. You want to be the specialist. And so that's typically the most important thing. It's the feeling that you get when you talk to people and if you're comfortable or uncomfortable. And sometimes they say that 30% of the people that meet you will like you just instinctively. The other 30% won't care. And for whatever reason, 30% of the people won't like you. So that 30%, if there's a higher proportion than the 30% of the people you meet that you like, if you like them, they generally like you. And maybe you're meeting 70% of the people you like as opposed to 30 or 20 or whatever, then that should tell you something. And that's how you need to, or you should be evaluating that. Good question. Okay. In the context of legal job searches, you mentioned that you mentioned that attorneys sometimes overlook key indicators of their own happiness. Can you share more examples of these indicators and how they can be used to recommend identifying these signs before making a career move? Okay. I think it again goes back to the people that you feel comfortable with. I think the example that I gave earlier in the webinar was about a woman that was working for the environmental division of the government. Her happiness was really dependent on having predictable hours, having a job that was secure, about having time at night with her family and her kids and all this sort of thing. And then when she got a job in a law firm, and I explained to her all the things that she needed to do to succeed in a law firm that she might not be able to do that were different than working for the government, she immediately realized, even though she'd taken an offer, that that wasn't something that made her happy, and she had other overreaching things of importance. So you need to find, if you're not happy in a law firm, there's certainly all these other practice settings that you can work in that you can be happy. And so when you're thinking about like where you're going to go or what you're going to do, you need to emphasize, we need to seek out like a practice setting or a type of firm that's going to make you happy. And again, that doesn't always have to be working in a law firm. It can be a lot of people are like natural academics and they should be law professors, and that's what makes them happy. Other people are more suited to work in-house than a law firm or in public interest or or to being reporters about the law. There's a lot of people that become legal reporters that are attorneys. I mean, there's all, or legal recruiters. I mean, there's all these different types of jobs that can make you happy. And the important thing is to put yourself in a job, in a position where you're happy, as opposed to the other way around. Okay. You discussed how law firms use subtle clues to determine whether someone will be happy and successful in the role. What are some of the most common missteps attorneys make during interviews or in their applications that might signal they're not a good fit, even if it's unintentional? Avoid these pitfalls and stay authentic. Okay, so law firms are looking for things that show a lack of commitment to working in a law firm, a lack of focus, that things that show that they have other interests that are outside of a law firm. So sometimes people will do things like, I've seen resumes where people have been at a firm for 5 years and they have 2 lines discussing their experience. And then they literally have 3 or 4 lines discussing what they did in law school jobs. And it might have been different, and just, it's crazy. During interviews and applications, the biggest thing is to look just very committed to whatever your practice area is. So your applications need to reflect that. And then in interviews that need to reflect that. And then your enthusiasm for whatever the job is needs to reflect that. And then the questions that you ask about wanting to be in one different type of firm or another, to ask like, what can I do for you? How can I be like a really good associate, or if you're a partner, what does it take to perform and do well here? Any questions that you ask are likely to make the law firm think that you're going to do really good work. That's important to you, is the most important. Your authenticity needs to basically communicate that this is what you want, that the work's important to you, that you want to do a good job, that you're going to work hard. That's what you would want if you were hiring a nanny or someone, or if you were hiring a lawyer, you'd want the same thing. That's the sort of stuff that you need to communicate. It's all about the person that's interviewing you. It doesn't really have a lot to do with you. You have to you have to make yourself sellable to them. And the best way to do that is to always talk in terms of their interests and ask them what they need. And people like that, and no one does it. I don't really understand why. But if you do that, people are going to want to hire people that want to do good work for them. And so that's really the best piece of advice I can give you for that. Okay. This is a good question. Thank you. And then I think after this, there's only one other question. So if anybody has any other questions, I'll answer them. Otherwise, we're just about done. Okay, so please advise if there's a standard preferred resume style for law firms and corporations. Yes. So law firms don't do things like, for an in-house resume, typically what you want to show is you have, especially if you're trying to be in a general counsel type role, but you want to show that you have all this experience doing all these different types of things, whether it's like working corporate work or it's helping with employment law, managing litigation, like all these sorts of things. So that's what a in-house resume typically will do. And they will do that because companies that are hiring in-house counsel will often want people to do all those different sorts of things so they can save money on legal fees and have people that are able to handle all these matters and legal things that companies are dealing with. So the in-house resume typically is going to talk about a lot of different practice areas. And that's just how it works. And they will do that. And that's often what's most effective to get a job in a company. Sometimes in-house resumes, most of them do it. They put together like a summary at the top, the very top of the resume. And then they will have, when they discuss their in-house experience, they will discuss all these different sorts of matters that they've worked on. And that is the resume that most in-house attorneys will use after they've been practicing in-house for a substantial length of time. I don't like putting the summary at the top. I think just the description of the experience is pretty much self-explanatory. Companies are not necessarily experts in hiring attorneys, so they're often looking for people that have the ability to do different types of things. That's how a typical in-house resume will work, but it depends on the in-house resume. So sometimes if you're working for a larger company as an in-house attorney, they may need people that only do patent law, and they'll have people doing other things. They'll need people because they do mergers and things. We'll give them assistance doing mergers. They'll just have all these different types of needs and they'll look for specialists. And typically, the larger the company, the more specialized they expect you to be. But most in-house attorneys that aren't working for the largest companies will have these resumes that discuss all these different things, and that's perfectly acceptable. Sometimes they'll even say things like, I saved the company $5 million by figuring this thing out or something, or $10 million, or reduced expenses by this percentage. And so that's actually okay in an in-house resume. An in-house resume is completely different from a law firm resume. And if you try to apply to law firms with this type of resume that people do in-house, it's like the exact opposite of what a law firm wants to see. A law firm just wants to see someone that's an expert in one practice area 99% of the time. They don't care about all this other experience you have because their clients are hiring them to be experts. So if you're like general counsel of a company and your company gets sued by an employee, you're going to go find an employment attorney that's experienced doing employment law. And you're not going to want to hire someone that does 15 different things like an in-house resume may have. So in-house resumes typically are much more detailed about a lot of different types of responsibility. The people that tend to be the most employable over the long term, I had a coaching client that I've been working with, and these partners will often pay me, I'll get paid a lot of money, like $5,000 a month to coach them in 2 90-minute calls. And then I do available via email and text and stuff. But this one person that I'm coaching right now is a in-house franchising attorney, but he started out his career in a law firm doing franchising, and he's been working for a series of different brands doing different companies. Like one is a big fast food company, the other's I don't know, like some sort of chain or something. He does nothing but franchising law. And he's actually very well positioned to move back into a law firm because he just has nothing but franchising experience. And there's not a lot of people like that. But typically an in-house resume would talk about a lot of different things. When you're applying for your first in-house job, you are typically going to be an expert in one thing. So the company may hire you for your expertise in corporate work. And then as you're progressing there, you'll be exposed to different types of things. And so the initial resume of someone applying for an in-house job, if they're coming from a law firm, is most often going to be a resume that is focused on one practice area. When a company is hiring an attorney from a law firm, they're typically hiring you because you're young, you're enthusiastic, you're an expert in a certain practice area, and you're less likely to be giving work to others and more likely to be doing the work yourself. It's often much easier to get a job in-house when you're, at least for large companies, when you're coming from a law firm as opposed to in-house. But yeah, in-house resumes will go into a lot of detail about different practice areas, and that's perfectly acceptable. Okay, last question. Let's see here. For those returning to the practice of law after major political turmoils causing an extended period of unemployment, what qualities would attract and get the firm's attention? How do they care much about personal business? So the law firms do not care about your personal business. Sometimes they do. If they get to the point of making you an offer, they may want to know about that. They may want to talk to your previous employers, or they may have questions for you about that. One of the problems with people bringing up things like they were sick or they were going through these very difficult personal issues is that, again, if you say you're sick, you're putting yourself in a competition with people that haven't been sick. If you had personal issues that cause you to leave a law firm, you're putting yourself into competition with people that didn't have personal issues, or if they had them, stayed in the law firm. I don't like saying these things. I'm just telling you I'm not telling you how I feel. I'm just telling you how law firms will evaluate it. There's nothing wrong with if you have had periods of unemployment or an extended period of unemployment and you want to come back. Obviously, everything's about the law of supply and demand. So if a law firm does have an opening for someone like you and you look like the best choice, you'll get hired. Anybody can get hired. It's not a question of not being able to get a job. It's just a question of how you approach it. Typically, if you had a long-term period of unemployment and you're applying to job openings, if they can find someone without that period, they will hire them. If they can't, they will hire you. Or if you're applying to firms that don't necessarily have openings, that can also be very beneficial because law firms won't be competing with anybody. If they have need for someone in that practice area, they will bring you on. So your qualities, what's going to get their attention? What's going to get their attention is typically if you have a resume that looks focused on a practice area, The longer you have that experience, the better off you're going to be. So the longer you've been working in a given practice area, the more impressed the law firm is going to be by your resume. And if you have focus on a practice area as opposed to having done different things, they're going to like that. They're going to like it more. If your experience is only in law firms and not in other practice settings, anything that shows commitment to a law firm and your practice area is really what you need to emphasize. But yeah, law firms are not interested in personal turmoil, but you still can get jobs. I had one guy that was managing partner of a pretty well-sized firm. I think it was like probably like an AmLaw 200 law firm or something similar. And he had this really bad alcoholism and got fired. And over the course of the year, cleaned himself up. And I was able to get him a job in a really good law firm. Not as large as the one he was in, but he was still able to get a job. And so if you have personal demons or things that you've struggled with, and then people ask you about it, maybe when they get close to making an offer, you certainly can be honest with them about it. And you need to get your foot in the door first, and you need to make them like you and think that you would do a good job for them before any of the stuff comes up. And most of the time, if someone brings you an interview, that means when law firms interview people, if they bring them in for interviews, they actually want to hire you. Like they don't want to have to interview more people. They don't like having to spend the time. It's not fun for them because they're taking billable hour time and interviewing you instead of billing hours. So it's not something that they necessarily enjoy, having a parade of people coming through. So once a law firm does want to interview you, the job is yours to lose. So you need to do all the things that I spoke about today that can help you. Great. So I hope this webinar was helpful. I think it was a very important topic. It's something that most attorneys aren't doing. And if you do these things, it's going to make you more successful. I commend you for spending the time here today. I think that anytime you can invest in learning this type of information that most attorneys and law students and other people don't know, you're really setting yourself up for success. Even just if you remember 2 or 3 things I spoke about today, and you remember them like 3 months from now and 6 months from now, it's going to help you really chart a better direction with your legal career, no matter what you're trying to do. And yeah, so I thank you for all the questions, and I will see everyone again next week. Thank you.